What I'm about to tell you rarely appears in school books. Have you ever stopped to wonder how people in the Viking Age made it through the blackest, coldest nights, without electricity, radiators, or even a steady supply of firewood? Their solutions were far more clever than many imagine. When winters swallowed the northern fjords and temperatures plunged far below what most of us could tolerate, modern comforts didn't exist. There were no light switches, no boilers, and no electric stoves. Yet the Norse people not only lived through these brutal seasons, they prospered. Their strength lay not in resisting winter, but in understanding it, adapting to it, and using knowledge handed down over generations. Their homes, their clothing, and even their daily routines were designed with one goal: staying alive through months of darkness and bitter cold. It was a quiet, constant battle, not fought with blades, but with creativity and cooperation. Stay with me until the end, because you'll learn how the structure of their homes transformed body heat into a natural heater, and why simple wool outperformed many modern, technical fabrics. The longhouse, more than just a shelter. You've probably seen Viking longhouses in documentaries or games presented as rough huts thrown together from timber. But that picture is misleading. A longhouse wasn't just a building. It was the emotional, social, and practical center of an entire group. It protected people not only from the elements, but also from the psychological strain of endless winter darkness. Communities gathered under one enormous roof. Families, workers, leaders, everyone. With dozens of people living shoulder to shoulder, something remarkable happened. Their shared body heat naturally warmed the interior. The more people present, the warmer the space became. Inside, life never really went quiet. Men carved wood, mended tools and weapons, and repaired gear. Women spun wool, wove fabric, and worked endlessly on clothing and household items. This constant movement generated more warmth, but just as importantly, it kept minds active. Activity warded off hopelessness and fear, emotions that could easily take hold during a months-long polar night. The longhouse served as the community's hub. Stories were recited, news was passed around, deals were made, and people simply spent time together. This social closeness was essential. Isolation could be deadlier than the cold outside. Even the strict routines and chores had a purpose. Knowing what to do and when to do it gave structure to days that otherwise blended into one long stretch of darkness. The longhouse was essentially a living organism, where every person played a role and everyone depended on one another. In the Viking world, warmth wasn't just something you built with wood and fire. It was something you built together. A house that helped heat itself. Viking buildings weren't put together haphazardly. Their design grew from centuries of trial, observation, and clever adaptation. Every part of a longhouse, its walls, roof, layout, and materials, was optimized to hold on to as much warmth as possible. The walls were built using a wooden frame, but the magic was in the insulation. Spaces between the beams were packed with wool or plant fibers plastered over with clay. And on the outside, builders added a thick layer of turf, sometimes nearly a full meter deep. This natural coat worked much like modern insulation, protecting the interior from frigid winds and keeping heat from escaping. In winter, drifting snow added yet another insulating layer. Longhouses had almost no windows at all. Instead, the only openings were small, low doors covered with hides, plus a vent in the roof for smoke. This design kept heat in remarkably well, even though it meant the inside remained dim. The roof, too, was built with insulation in mind. Layers of birch bark kept the structure waterproof, while another blanket of turf pressed on top of it, trapping heat and making the house sturdy enough to withstand storms. Even the shape of the longhouse mattered. Long, narrow proportions allowed warmth from the central hearth to spread evenly along the length of the building. People slept and worked along the walls, while the center remained the heart of activity. Floors were typically packed earth, covered in straw or dried grass. This not only kept the ground from stealing warmth from bare feet, but also absorbed moisture and could be replaced easily when dirty. With low ceilings and tightly sealed walls, the longhouse was essentially an early passive heating system, built long before the concept existed. But even the best insulated home won't save you if you aren't dressed for the cold. And this is where the Vikings had one of their biggest advantages: the secret power of Viking clothing. If you imagine Viking garments as heavy, scratchy wool layers, you're only partly right. Their real secret was more unusual. Lanolin, a natural grease found in sheep's wool. Unlike modern processed fibers, Viking wool was treated minimally. They intentionally kept the lanolin in the fabric. The result? Clothing that naturally repelled water, resisted wind, and stayed warm even when damp. A priceless advantage in the wet, freezing north. But their brilliance didn't stop there. They also discovered, long before modern explorers did, the power of layering. Here's how their clothing system worked. 1. The inner layer, a linen shirt worn against the skin. Linen helped wick moisture away so sweat couldn't freeze against the body. 2. The middle layers, one or more wool tunics worn over the linen. These layers trapped pockets of air, still, warm air, which was the true insulator. 3. The outer layer, a thick wool cloak treated with lanolin. This cloak acted like a medieval rain jacket and winter coat in one. During the day, it shielded from sleet and snow. At night, it doubled as a blanket. 4. Leg and foot protection. Wool trousers were paired with tightly wrapped leg bindings to keep snow from creeping into shoes. Foot coverings were roomy rather than tight, allowing warm air to circulate. Another intuitive nod to thermodynamics. Nothing about their wardrobe was random. Every piece served a purpose, combining to form a reliable, weatherproof system that kept them alive on the sea, in the fields, and inside the longhouse. The hearth, the warm core of the longhouse. At the very center of every Viking dwelling was a fire, but not the compact fireplaces we know today. Instead, their main heat source was a long, open trench fire running through the middle of the room. This design allowed many people to warm themselves, cook, and work at the same time. The flame wasn't just practical, it was the longhouse's heartbeat. Its flicker provided the only steady light during the deep winter months, casting moving shadows on tools, faces, and the beams overhead. In a season when the sun hardly rose, this fire became a symbol of life itself. Wood was precious in some northern regions, so the Vikings often relied on peat, dense, slow-burning, and efficient. Smoke drifted upward toward a vent in the roof. It wasn't perfect, the air could get smoky, but the trade-off was warmth and light, which mattered far more. Around the hearth were benches used as seats during the day and beds at night. People slept close to the embers so their cloaks could absorb the residual heat until morning. The hearth also carried spiritual importance. Tending the flames wasn't merely a chore, it was a duty. Fire represented continuity, family, and tradition. As long as it burned, the household was alive and protected. Surviving on summer's work, food for the frozen months. Months before the first snow, the Vikings were already preparing for winter. They understood that survival depended on a well-stocked pantry. Fish, especially cod, was a staple. It was cut into strips, and air-dried until it became hard and nearly weightless, perfect for long-term storage. This dried fish could last years. Meat was preserved through salting and smoking. Smoke not only removed moisture, but also infused the meat with compounds that slowed spoilage. Milk from the warmer seasons was transformed into cheese and skyr, a thick fermented dairy product that stored well and supplied much-needed fats and proteins. Grains like barley and rye were dried and kept in chests or underground pits. They were boiled into hearty porridge or baked into flat, tough bread that stayed edible for months. Root vegetables, turnips, onions, carrots, were stored in pits or cellars below the frost line, staying fresh through most of winter. Berries and mushrooms were dried for flavor and extra nutrients. Fats were indispensable, not only as calorie-dense food, but also for lamps. A single bowl of fish oil with a moss wick could light up a workbench on the darkest nights. And of course, ale and beer were brewed throughout the year. They weren't just beverages, they were safer than questionable water sources and provided extra calories during hard times. This system of preserving food transformed their toughest season into a manageable one. The winter table wasn't luxurious, but it was reliable, and that reliability saved lives. Lighting the darkness. Before electricity, a flame was priceless. Besides the central fire, the Vikings used small stone or clay lamps filled with animal fat or fish oil. The wicks burned slowly and dimly, but the light was enough for evening work, wood carving, spinning, repairing tools. Every tiny flame counted. Winter wasn't spent idly waiting for spring. It was a season of intense production. Winter, a season of work, not rest. The colder months were when Vikings repaired their world. Men mended nets, shaped new handles for tools, and prepared boats for the next season. In larger communal buildings, whole crews worked on repairing longships, patching cracks, replacing timbers, sealing gaps with tar. Blacksmiths forged and sharpened weapons. Shields were reinforced. Armor was repaired. Women's tasks were equally vital. Wool was spun into thread. Massive sections of cloth were woven for clothing and especially for sails, the engines of Viking travel. A single ship's sail required an enormous amount of work and wool, making this one of the most valued winter crafts. Even everyday items, wooden bowls, combs, spoons, bone tools, were crafted during these long, dark months. Children learned by doing. Winter was their classroom, and every skill they absorbed strengthened the community for the years ahead. Despite the wind roaring outside, the longhouse stayed full of purpose, noise, and warmth. Hygiene and health in the harsh months. Winter living meant close quarters, shared bedding, and breathing the same smoky air day after day. Despite this, Vikings took hygiene seriously, more so than many of their European contemporaries. Combs made of bone or antler were used daily, not only for grooming, but also for removing lice. Hot water was heated at the hearth for washing faces and hands. While full baths weren't frequent in winter, steam baths similar to saunas were sometimes used when possible, offering both warmth and cleansing. Clothing also helped maintain health. Layered wool garments retained heat even when damp. Fur-lined cloaks and boots protected the most vulnerable parts of the body. Woolen hats, mittens, and leg wrappings kept cold injuries to a minimum. But sickness still happened. Herbs, poultices, and teas were used to treat fevers and infections, though many ailments simply had to run their course. Survival often depended on community support. Elders cared for children, and neighbors shared food when someone was too weak to work. Mind and spirit, staying strong during endless night. Winter in the north tested more than just the body. It tested the mind. Months of darkness could weigh heavily on the spirit. To stay resilient, the Vikings relied on routine, community, and storytelling. Evenings were filled with sagas, tales of gods, ancestors, journeys, and battles. Storytelling wasn't entertainment alone. It was a psychological lifeline. Hearing of triumph, bravery, and cleverness helped people endure the emotional challenges of isolation. Music, too, played a role. Harps, flutes, and simple percussion instruments added life to long nights. Songs passed down through generations were sung around the fire, strengthening identity and unity. There were games, riddles, and contests of wit. Children played with carved toys. Adults challenged each other in board games like Nefatafel, a predecessor of chess. Winter also hosted important rituals. Seasonal feasts such as Yule, brought entire communities together for days of drinking, eating, singing, and offerings to the gods. These celebrations renewed hope and marked the slow turning of the sun back toward spring. Myth, magic, and the meaning of winter. To the Vikings, winter wasn't just a season, it was part of a cosmic rhythm. The world itself had cycles of creation, destruction, and rebirth. The cold months were associated with Jotun giants, spirits of frost, and forces of darkness, but also with wisdom, endurance, and necessary transformation. Magic, known as Seder, was sometimes practiced more during winter, when the veil between worlds was believed to be thinner. Charms were carved into wooden amulets. Runes were cast to seek guidance for the coming year. These beliefs didn't just explain winter, they empowered people to face it. Seeing the cold as part of a greater story gave meaning to hardship and framed survival as an act of spiritual strength. The return of light. Eventually, the first signs of spring appeared, a faint warmth in the wind, dripping eaves, the softening of frozen earth. The longhouse doors were thrown open. People emerged into the pale light, blink like they were waking from a long dream. The community sprang into action, repairing fields, preparing ships, tending animals with newborn energy. The world returned to motion. But winter had shaped them. It had forced them together, strengthened their bonds, sharpened their skills, and reminded them of the fierce beauty of endurance. The Vikings survived winter through discipline, ingenuity, and cooperation. They worked hard during the warm months to stock their homes with fuel and food, then turned inward when the cold arrived, transforming the long, dark season into a time of creativity and communal strength. Life wasn't easy, but it was deeply connected, purposeful, and rich with tradition. Winter didn't merely test them, it defined them.